watching NWCN, Northwest Cable News. And now, an in-depth half-hour exploring one of the day's top stories. 30 minutes, one topic. This is Northwest Extra with Cam Johnson.
It's a tale of two whales. First, there was Keiko, penned for years, star of the movie Free Willy, finally taken back to his home waters near Iceland. Now, nearly 4 years later, the killer whale appears to have found a new home and perhaps a new family. Last January, it was Springer, the little orphaned orca found playing in the Puget Sound. After spending several long afternoons chasing fairies, she was reunited with her pod in Canadian waters and appears to be doing well. Her brush with humans only a chapter in the whale's young life as she travels alongside her new pod. Keiko and Springer free at last. That's the focus of tonight's Northwest Extra. Good evening. I'm Mark Coleman, in for Cam Johnson. We want to take a look at how these two whales are doing in their home waters and check in with the experts on their progress. Let's start with Springer. Dr. Paul Spong joins me by phone from Orca Lab, located on the north end of Vancouver Island. Actually, Hansen Island. Thank you very much. This is a spot where Springer was released just last month. Dr. Spong and his staff have been following her return to the wild. Dr. Spong, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Mark.
Very nice. Thank you for joining us this evening. It seems like Springer is actually a success story in just about every way. What do you think?
Well, certainly every sign that we have so far is positive, and we're very encouraged. However, we're not to a point yet where I can say absolutely that we know this is a success, but everything looks great. She looks good. Everything that's happening to her in terms of what we know looks good, but we don't know the end of the story yet.
Dr. Spong, you said that she looks good. The skin condition that she has, does that appear to be better now? Is she recovering from that?
Yes, actually, the skin condition is improving. But when I say looks good, I mean, I think I'm talking mostly about her, the signs of her reintegration with her social group. When, as you know, she was isolated from her social group after her mom died. And the process of reintegration seems to be occurring quite smoothly, I would think. The last we saw of her, she was actually with her natal family group, and we thought that to be a very encouraging development. However, we haven't seen her for 6 days now. So we're waiting for our next sighting, really, to sort of make another comment.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Since she's lost the suction cup with the tracking device, how have you been able to follow her? It sounds like you really haven't.
Actually, she's pretty easy to spot. She has a very distinct saddle patch, and her skin condition is still mottled enough for that to be another distinguishing sign. And then, of course, you have the company that she's keeping, the whales that she's swimming with. So when there's a group with what you might consider an extra little fin in it, you start looking for Springer. And this is certainly what happened with the first two whales that she took up with A51 and 61. And it's going to be the clue that I guess we look for when the whales return.
Dr. Spong, last week we heard that Springer's main companion was actually steering her off from boats. Now, that's got to be a good sign that she won't be endangered. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's a very encouraging sign, Mark. The behavior that Springer had towards boats initially was the most worrying thing about the whole situation, and it seemed to be something that that A51, the female that she took up with, who's 16 years of age, seemed to also to be aware of, in the sense that she actively discouraged Springer from approaching boats, at least on 2 occasions that we know about. And since then, Springer has actually been in amongst boats, commercial fishing boats, sports fishing boats, touring boats, and so forth, without, so far as we know, even giving a hint of any interest in them. So I think what is happening in that respect is really indicative of great progress.
That's remarkable, and that's also probably a fairly good sign that she's being reaccepted by the pod, then, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and she certainly seems to be right in the thick of the other whales. There's been a huge number of whales in the area since she came in. In fact, more than half of the northern resident population have been present while she's been here. She's been in amongst or not too far away from 21 of the 34 matrilines in the northern resident community. So she's already got a great deal of socialization behind her, and I'm sure that's all to the good in terms of the ultimate outcome.
That's fantastic. Dr. Paul Spong, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome.
We will talk to you again soon. Now, joining me in the studio is Michael Harris, president of the Orca Conservancy. His group has spearheaded Springer's recovery and has taken great interest in Keiko's rehabilitation. Also joining me is a legendary orca expert, Ted Griffin. He was the first to bring Namu and Shamu into our area and help us understand the potential of orcas as marine animals. Now, how do you both view Keiko's rehabilitation? Ted, I'll ask you first. How do you see that as unfolding?
Keiko is a fabulous story, and if that whale joins up and goes wild, it's an incredible story. I mean, I can see a motion picture film.
We love having Ted on. Yeah. Absolutely. Michael, the same question to you. I mean, in the big picture here, for the development of both our interaction with the whales and for the whale's own development in the wild, what does this say to us?
Well, you know, the Keiko project was very interesting because, you know, if you have to look for a candidate to take out of a tank and put into the wild, yeah, you know, Keiko was one of the worst candidates in the world. I mean, Keiko was in captivity for what, 23, 24 years? A very bad condition in a really horrible place in Mexico City. Right. And yet he is continuously surprising people, continuously proving the naysayers wrong. And and what we hear from Ocean Futures and everybody involved with this project is every time we check in on Keiko, he's teaching us new things and he's learning new things and he's surprising us. And so I think it bodes well, not just for Keiko and for captive whales, but I think it bodes well for our understanding about everything we need to do with wild populations.
Absolutely. Ted, you have quite a history, of course, with these whales going back several years. So you have kind of the bigger picture, you know, what we call in weather we call the big picture, the synoptic picture. What do you see? Do you see that we've learned? Have we learned from this something that maybe it's taken us several years and we didn't learn? That makes sense?
Well, you have to begin with the beginning. I mean, right up front, I was taken for a ride, as you know, early on.
Right.
So where has it been from there? Yeah, we're learning a lot. What are we learning? We need to know how smart these animals are, what they're capable of. We need to know what help they need from us environmentally. We also need to know how we can get close to these animals, understand them without actually making pets out of them so that they come up alongside the boat and get in trouble, which they're doing now.
Right.
And so the deal is this: how do we get close and learn more without getting close and learn more? That's a big question.
That's a tough place to be, and you're talking about the wild too.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, and honestly, I mean, when Ted first got into this thing, we knew so little about these whales. I mean, we were shooting them, we were using them as target practice, and one part of what Ted did and had, you know, was great in doing, showing the capacities of these animals. You know, they're not enemies, they're not something to be shot at, but they're capable of amazing things. And I think as time went on, either also we learned about their cultural capacities and we learned more about them intellectually. And I think that's when people start saying, well, wait a minute, well, maybe we shouldn't capture them. So in some ways, what Ted did was great in teaching us about orcas, and then I think in time that kind of turned a little bit, and we started saying, hey, well, what are we doing here capturing them? Maybe they're better left in the wild.
Right.
So it's come full circle.
I mean, there are so many issues with wild animals and wild mammals, and this seems to me that it's really brought, you know, you mentioned the movies earlier, really brought an awareness to people of the situation, not only orcas, but several species of animals that may be endangered. If I'm not mistaken, Keiko's being taken care of by a foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. Is that correct?
Well, in actual fact, Ocean Futures took over from Free Willy Keiko Foundation at some point, and actually it's now back with the Humane Society of the United States and Free Willy Keiko Foundation, so it's now back into a couple organizations that are running the show right now.
But that was an intervention by people, by regular people who said, you know what, I don't want to, you know, how does that make you feel, Ted? I'll ask you first, to see that, you know, that involvement after all these years.
Well, I mean, if you got the whale and he's alongside you and he's in the tank and you had him for 20 years, what are you going to do? I mean, what you do is what you do. You take the whale back, you introduce him into the wild as fast as he will take it. It's been slow, and he's had a long stay at Newport Aquarium and so on. But is the whale doing well? From what I hear and occasionally see, it looks phenomenal. And I'd say the whale is making great strides on getting back. Now, what can we learn about a whale in captivity for all those years and then going back to the wild and interacting? And what does that whale bring with him into the wild pod? And does that change the dynamics?
Oh.
I mean, where are we going to go?
So that's what we're looking at from here on out. We want to try to see what the effect is of that.
Are we looking at that?
And honestly, I mean, part of what he's saying is, I mean, you can learn a lot from having an animal that you can control and draw blood from and do things. But in the end, though, you're learning just about a fish in a fishbowl, in a way. And so I think that's what people are learning. And you know, the problem that we had and what we learned about Springer and what we're learning about Keiko slowly but surely is that these animals are capable of amazing things, and that we have to trust the fact that they have these amazing abilities to repatriate, to take care of each other, to relearn how to be wild whales. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning. And you know, and again, I mean, we learn a lot from having an animal in a tank. We learn a heck of a lot more learning about animals when they're outside of a tank. And we learned a lot from Springer, and we're learning about Keiko.
What were, you know, after having Keiko and then with Springer, what were the main concerns with Springer? And Ted, I'll ask you this question. What were they looking at, saying, okay, we did this with Keiko, we're doing this with Springer? What were...
Well, initially, of course, Springer's health was a big question. And the other problem was that the whale wasn't interacting with other whales. He was hanging around driftwood and boats. A very dangerous situation. So we intervened. I say we, the term loosely. I wasn't there. I wasn't invited. But Michael and his crew got that whale beautifully out of the area and back to the pod. And it appears at this juncture that things are going well.
That was absolutely amazing. I have to tell you, when I first moved here, I commuted and I took the ferry. And seeing whales on the edge of that deck, that is absolutely a life experience. That must be marvelous work you do.
Yeah, I know ferry ridership is down now because the whale's gone.
The whale's gone. The state's trying to stimulate.
Oh, yeah.
I think the ferry system's going to sue Springer, I think.
We're going to go get some dolphins or something. We need to get business up.
Springer the ferry,
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be right back in just a minute. First, we're going to take a commercial break, and then we're going to take a look at your 5-day forecast. We'll see you then.
Watching NWCN, Northwest Extra.
Welcome back again. I'm Mark Coleman, filling in this evening for Cam Johnson. Tonight, we're looking at Springer and Keiko, two whales from the Northwest that are now back in their wild environments. In the studio with me is Michael Harris, president of the Orca Conservancy, and he is on the end. Ted, of course, is our orca expert. Ted, you used to capture orcas for several years.
I did, for several years.
Look, I'm just waiting for him to get me. He's going to get me.
I'm going to get you.
With the Orca Lab doing all the research, in fact, what Michael's doing, what is it about that fascinates you? What do you look at Michael at and say, wow, that's really great. I wish we could have done that years ago.
Well, I hate to shift it a little bit on you, but what Malcolm did with the study of the whales, the patterns identification is probably the most significant thing that's ever happened.
Absolutely.
We knew the whales. You know, he'd come in. I say, "There's Hook. Don't touch that pod. He'll take them away. We can't catch him." Or we'd put a net around the pod, and Hook would take right through the net, open it up, and all of them would swim out behind him. And we'd have 2 days repairing our net. It just happened over and over again.
Wow.
So we just let him go. But while you were doing your weather, we thought, could we buy weather futures from you? I'm painting my house right now. It's got to be dry.
He's going to make me give him weather futures. Well, next week. Next week is your stretch.
Good.
But I'm not very good with a paintbrush, so.
But, you know, what are they doing now? They're taking pictures. They're following the whales. I follow the whales day and night in a boat. Like Springer right now, I'd be up there walking along or driving along or in a boat following Springer and listening to him. I'd have a hydrophone in the water, a towing unit that towed about 400 feet behind the boat, so it doesn't pick up the boat engine, and then I could hear the whales. And I could tell, and I record them and listen to them. That's what I was doing in 1965. That's how I was catching the whales. I'd follow them day and night for days. And I'd call my partner, Don Goldsberry, and he'd say, what is it this time, Ted? And I'd say, get a boat. We got to catch some whales. That's how we did it.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and part of the problem, too, I mean, a lot of these things are great stories, but part of the problem, too, is now we've got an entire southern resident population that just got turned down to list as endangered, and Orca Conservancy is one of the petitioners on that. We've just released an intent to sue. We've got a problem with our resident population.
Right.
One of the problems, and this is not necessarily Ted's fault, but there's a gap, a breeding age gap of animals that were taken out during this period, this intensive period from 65 to 75
so you have
to
a
76.
generation missing, basically.
So you have a whole generation that's been missed, and I think what's learned is not just how to capture whales, and it's what we've learned is that you know, now you just can't keep taking animals out without having impacts later on the population, so we learned a lot. And one of the things that Ted didn't learn.
Listed then on you.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
You and I go into business. We capture about 6 or 8, and that'll bring the pod number down to the point where they'll put them on the list.
Well, I don't know if I'd enter into that business transaction.
I get another whale.
No, well, you know.
Let's talk about the legal ramifications. I understand that the Orca Conservancy is actually filing a lawsuit. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're one of the petitioning groups that are basically challenging this horrible decision on the part of the federal agencies who are supposed to be protecting orcas to find a loophole, to basically find a loophole in the listing and say this is not a significant population. What they have said essentially is that if we lose this population, that's okay, because other whales will move in. And that is absurd. And what that does is everything we have learned about since the time of Ted, they're thrown out the window. They, you know, what we know about these animals being dialectically, having unique languages, being socially, having a culture within themselves. This population for thousands of years has been distinct and has been significant. And now we have the federal agencies who allegedly stepped up and were crocodile hunters and saved one whale, obviously don't have the capacity or the interest to really look after our entire population. That's really upsetting.
That's an absolute fact. We got a unique group here. The ones that come in from the outside don't stay. They go away. They don't know the habits. They don't know how to swim. They don't know how to follow the shore. They don't know where the fish migrate and congregate. It's stupid.
Yeah, and what we have learned about Springer, and I'm sure that's a question, is what have we learned from the Springer thing? And I'll tell you one thing we learned is that you really have to spoon feed some of these federal agencies to really do anything. You know, we pushed them, and back when our Orca Conservancy got involved back in February and March, they didn't listen to us. People said we were crazy. How are you going to repatriate a whale to its natal pot? It's never been done, therefore it can't be done. We had to spoon feed them and tell them where the money is, how to get that money, how to raise that money, how to do it without taking money from schools, from social programs, and we had to basically hold their hand all the way through the process. And now it's really upsetting. I mean, I have to say, I mean, we have such interest in this one whale and in Keiko and other whales, but we have to find that, take that interest and channel it into what to do about this population. This population's in trouble. Well,
they also appear to have a much deeper social fabric than maybe other wild animals, maybe because they're mammals, you know, but that's something we have to take into consideration.
Yeah, and absolutely, and we learned that because in the beginning when Ted was doing his captures, they thought there were thousands of whales out here. We learned that there were, you know,
many hundreds.
Many hundreds.
We thought they were like guppies.
You know, it's a little known fact, the Russians did not get the quota for the little piked or sperm whale, not sperm whale, the finback. They killed 900 killer whales in Antarctica to make up for the blubber count that they lost when the International Whaling Convention took away the blubber from the finback whale.
Yeah,
amazing.
And so, you know, that number just blew me away. 900 in one area in a couple-week period, but we're not talking about that. There may only be 10,000 in the whole world. That's not enough.
So that we don't know.
Not enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, you know, what we got to do is we got to take this massive media blitz that was surrounding this one whale.
And channel that.
And tell people, I mean, because obviously this is a region that loves killer whales. We love them. Sometimes we love them to death, you know, but, but we love them.
A little too much.
And when people say, hey, all this attention on one whale, what does that mean to the entire population? Well, it means that we have a chance here.
We need to make that work for us.
We need to translate it into protection for our whole population.
Thank you, Michael. We'll have more, in fact, an email address you can send your thoughts right after the break. We'll be back. Welcome back. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, of course, Michael Harris and Ted Griffin, and also talking to us on the phone a little earlier, Dr. Paul Spong. I do want to mention one thing. Friday Harbor Sunday is the reunion of the folks that made the Namu movie. After 35 years of getting back together, should be quite an event. Check it out. We'll take your email responses tonight's Northwest Extra. Just go to nwcn.com, click on Viewer Center. Again, that's Viewer Center at nwcn.com. Thanks for joining us.
You're watching NWCN, Northwest Cable News.